What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we are going to continue our Emacs desktop environment series by talking about how to enable desktop notifications using the program called Dunst. So if you have used any modern operating system or maybe a mobile device operating system, you are familiar with the concept of notifications. Basically, it's something that pops up on your screen to let you know that something happened or to sort of prompt you to take action. And generally they have, useful information about maybe like an email that came in, maybe like the subject of the email, or maybe the first couple lines, or anything like that. Like maybe if you use your brightness control, it tells you what your current brightness level is, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do today is set up the program called Dunst so that we can enable desktop notifications to show up in our EXWM-based desktop environment for Emacs. So this is really like the final piece of what we need for a standard desktop experience, I think. We've already got our normal window manager set up. We've got a panel that gives us all of our system information. And now we're going to get the final piece, in my opinion, which is having desktop notifications. And this will just sort of round out everything and make it so that certain applications we use, which do use notifications, let's say chat programs like Slack or Discord, etc., so that they can actually show their notifications and you will be notified when things happen in those apps. It's also a useful tool for your own uses. So maybe if you have a script that you want to run in the background and maybe you want to be notified whenever something happens in that script. In my case, I have a script that syncs my passwords that use the pass tool or password store tool that syncs from a GitHub repo. And I have a script that runs in the background that will periodically try to pull my passwords, and then it will use notify send, which is a program that will send a notification using the dbus specification. And basically just tell it that I want to write a notification called password synced, and then emblem synchronizing is the name of an icon to show for that. So it just gives a nice little sync icon. So it enables you to do nice little things like this in your own setup for your system, where if you want to show a notification, then Dunst will surface any notification that you send using the notify send command. And we'll show a little bit more examples of that later. So first of all, what we're going to do is set up Dunst. I've already got it installed on my virtual machine that we've been using for this configuration. If you want to install it yourself on Ubuntu, then you want to run the sudo apt install Dunst command. You can see that down here at the bottom. And if you run that, then it should install Dunst. Be aware that I'm using Ubuntu 20.04, and apparently it does not have the latest version of Dunst, or at least I haven't synced my packages yet, so maybe it does have the latest, but at least at the time of me recording this, I see, let's see, was it Dunst version 141, and that seems to have been released last year around some point. So it's likely that you'll have a newer version on your Linux distribution, or maybe on the newer Ubuntu, which is good because there's some improvements there that we'll talk about that are useful. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to be using Dunst 1.4.1. So the easiest way to get started is just to run the command Dunst. So I'm going to run this command, and you see that it basically blocks the shell because it's running in the foreground. Typically, if you're going to run this as a service, technically, or a daemon, you would want to run it with the ampersand or using some other way, like maybe using system control, because it does have a systemd service definition for Ubuntu. But in our case, we're just going to stick with running the command directly. And actually, let me just go ahead and run that in the background because I want to, I'm going to use the alt ampersand to use the async shell command and run Dunst that way so that we can have it separate from our shell. So like I showed you before, there's the notify send command, and we can just make a test notification. And you can see that there is a pop-up here in the upper right-hand corner of the screen that says test. So it shows us that we can easily invoke a notification. It tells us that in the output of Dunst that there's no icon found in path dialog information. With Dunst, it doesn't really have a good default setting for where your icon files are with your system. I think it does have some heuristics, but for whatever reason, they're not working correctly in Ubuntu or on my Geek system. So we'll show you how to configure the paths for those in a little bit. So let's move on to the next step. Let me pull up my notes again. So basically, the reason why I like Dunst is that it's minimal. It has very simple UI, simple footprint, doesn't do a lot of bells and whistles. It just basically displays notifications for you. It's also very easy to customize. What we're going to see in a moment is that you can customize the look and feel pretty broadly using the built-in configuration. And it's also keyboard controlled, or at least in the older versions of Dunst, they have key bindings set up where you can cause certain actions to take place whenever a notification appears, or to call back old notifications. However, in the new 1.5 series of Dunst, they have another command called Dunst control that you would use for doing the same kind of thing, but with whatever key binding system that you use, which in our case is Emacs, which is pretty great. Also, it fits in well with Polybar because it's very simple and minimalistic, and also you can theme it to look very similar to your Polybar theme as well. So it can make a very nice, coherent looking desktop environment between your theme in Emacs and the theme in Polybar and the theme in Dunst. So if you want to check out the homepage, you can go to dunst-project.org. They have documentation there on how to configure it, and we've already installed it, so we can go ahead and get going with it. So we showed using notify send. You can also send critical notifications if you want with the -u critical on notify send. And we're really just going through notify send to give you a way to experiment with your configuration yourself, but you can also use it in scripts this way, like I mentioned before. So let's say critical, your computer explode. So if I do a critical notification, it turns red instead. I don't often see notifications that use critical or other types of notification types. Maybe some services do that, or maybe some programs do that, but normally what you will see is the normal type of notification like test. And this also demonstrates another thing where if you run multiple notifications, then all of them will show sort of in a stack. And if I keep running this notify send test, it will continue to increment this number here, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, basically saying that you have duplicate notifications of a certain type. So it does give you some information on that if you do have duplicates. So let's see. I don't think we're going to get to see an icon very easily, but we'll set that up later. So to run Dunst, whenever we start up our desktop environment, the easiest way to do that is just like we've been doing the other applications so far, which is to use our EFS run in background command, or function, I suppose we could call it. So what we're going to do is drop into our desktop.org file, as we've been doing all this time, and we're going to go to our exwm init hook function, and let me get rid of this window. Then we're going to go down and drop this EFS run in background. Let me run my agent, Spice VD agent. Let me run that one more time. Sorry for that. Here we go. Yes. All right. So we're just going to copy this line and then put in Dunst instead. And what this is going to do is anytime we start up our exwm config, it's going to run Dunst, which is pretty useful because we want it to be running whenever we have our desktop environment set up. One thing I did notice, which I'm not sure if it's a thing on Ubuntu or if it's a thing that Dunst does in general, is that whenever I did not run Dunst, if I were to run notify send, somehow it knew to launch Dunst first and then show the notification. So I'm not sure what system configuration does that, but at least in this Ubuntu config, that did work. However, it's better to just be clear and run it yourself so that you know it's going to be run every single time and be ready for whenever a notification gets raised. So we don't really need to try that because it's just going to run Dunst. We already know that these other applications are running at startup, so we'll move on to the next thing. So what we want to do now is to set up a basic configuration for Dunst. And this is basically just a ripoff of my own config, but I'll tell you how you can customize it to your own usages. So let me just grab this long block of config here, and then we're going to drop it into our desktop.org file. And then we'll tangle that out using org mode as we've been doing with the other parts of the config so far. So now I'm going to drop down to the end here. We've got our desktop environment configuration settings. I'm going to add a new one for desktop notifications with Dunst. Then I'll paste in this block. And I need to tweak it a little bit because I took out the tangle expression to keep it from tangling on my own machine. So I'm going to copy this little bit here and then add it to the end of this line. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to save this file, and it's going to tangle out this config bit to the home folders.config/dunst/dunstrc file, and that's the default location where a Dunst configuration should live. So now we've got all this config spit out in that location. And we can configure various things here with like which monitor you want the notifications to display on by default, what the size of the notification should be by default, and also we have a little bit of an offset here. So -10 pixels from the right, plus 50 pixels from the top. So this sort of says we want it to be in the top right-hand corner of the screen, top right-hand corner. And also lots of other settings here that are useful. Some transparency settings, notification height, padding for inside of the contents of the notification frame. Also the color of the frame, which is important. And there's also a background somewhere, I think. Yeah. So they have different color settings for the different levels of message. So like a lower urgency message would have one color, a normal urgency message would have another, and then the critical would have its own setting for that. So if you want to get fancy with your colors for the different notification types that you may never see, then you should feel free to go ahead and set those here. But like I said, you may not see them unless you invoke them yourself. There's also a couple settings for keyboard shortcuts, but like I said, this is sort of deprecated now. I think that the new way going forward that they want you to configure Dunst is to use your own window manager key binding configuration and run the Dunst control command instead. But what we can see here is that there is a history command called control grave. Grave is on the US keyboard layout is the key to the left of the 1 key. So if I use control grave, it's going to show me this old notification that I popped up before. So it keeps a history of what notifications were displayed, tells you how long ago they happened. And if you keep hitting that control grave, it will tell you basically any of them back to a certain point, I think, in history. And this is useful in case you're sitting in front of your computer, but you're not using it, and there's some notifications popping up, but then by the time you look back at your computer, you see a notification disappear and you didn't know what it said. So you can use the control grave key by default to make that history pop back up again. So that can be pretty useful for seeing what happened before without having some UI to list everything, which is kind of nice. There's also like a context menu for notifications. Some notifications may have actions that you could take. I don't often see those either, but it is a possibility. It's something you could do yourself if you wanted to have a notification that had an action, and then you could either use the context menu, or there's an action command basically that says just run whatever the default action is for this notification, whether it's like opening a website or launching a program or anything like that. So you can set up key bindings for all those things. And there's also the settings for what you can do with the mouse buttons. So left clicking would close the notification, like I'm going to click these to close them here. Middle click will do whatever the default action is, and right click will close all the notifications that are currently visible. So usually the notifications will time out after a given period of time. In fact, that's configurable with the, is it idle? No. Let's see. There's definitely a timer for this to where it basically says how long it will wait before going away. I think don't remove messages if the user is idle for longer than idle threshold seconds. So basically at this setting, it's going to run for 2 minutes, basically. The notification will stay visible for 2 minutes. That's probably a little bit long, so you may want to change this for whatever your purposes are. But, it gives you any amount of customizability for that. So let's see, what else do we want to say about that? I think they had some more notes here. So the other thing that's important, if you want to see icons and notifications, which they do show up sometimes, depending on what program you're using, you need to set the icon position to some value, because by default it's off. But if you want to see icons, you should at least set it to left or maybe right. I prefer left. And then you will also need to set the icon path correctly. Actually, this seems to be my own icon path, but I believe that the path that we want to use on Ubuntu is a different one. Let me actually pull that up in Dired and see if I can find the right path for that. So let's pull up Dired. I'm going to go to /user/share/icons. Let's check out maybe Advaita. I'm trying to find a folder that has all of the stuff like emblems. Yeah, we want emblems and status, I think. So sometimes I don't see what I'm looking for here. What about this one? Yeah, that's one weird thing about icons in Linux is that they have different icons for different sizes, or they should have the same names but different sized icons, and it's very inconsistent which ones actually show up in a particular size. So I may not find what I'm looking for here. So I'm looking for like the sync one that I had before, but it doesn't seem to be showing up in any of these folders. Emblems, yeah. We'll just look at a couple more of these real quick. But software update available. What does that look like? Okay. So I might copy this path and just try to use that as an example. So I'm going to pop back over to this. I'm going to paste this path in, and then we can try that for looking at some icons. So you can also add multiple paths here by using a colon and then adding other paths as well to this. In fact, I can maybe say emblem. Was it called emblem? Emblems. Emblems. But we don't really have many there, so it's probably not going to show us very much. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you want to have your icons show up, you're going to have to find what the paths are for your system and then set them up correctly for that to work. So, and also we may see some confusion here because I have notifications showing up for my own configuration on top of the VM here. So that's going to be real nice to see. So what else? Maximum icon size. Now, if you have icons of different sizes, you may want to constrain the icon size so that you don't have some notifications that have a huge icon and then others that have a small icon. This just makes it so that it will scale down any icon that's beyond a particular size. And in my case, I found that 88 was a pretty good number to use, but you'll probably need to configure this for your purposes. Okay, I think that's all we want to talk about right now, and I probably did cover the rest of these. So let's just try out this configuration, actually. What we'll do is go back to eShell, and then I'm going to use pkill to get rid of the current Dunst process. And then I'll run it again. And now I will send another notification, and we'll see that now we have this nice looking notification style where we have a more like bluish gray background with a blue outline, and it says test, and the text is bigger. So we've configured the size, we've configured the font, we've configured the default size of the notifications, etc. So you can see that we can make it look basically however we want. I definitely recommend going and tweaking those configuration settings to get it to look however you want for your environment. So let's see, we can talk about how to control Dunst with Dunst control. So now that we've got it up and running, there's some things we can do. If you look at the help of the Dunst control command, there's a few different things that you can do with it. You can close the last notification. You can close all visible notifications. You can open the context menu, which basically gives you the available actions for the current notification. Then you can also cause it to pop up the notification from history. So if you missed that notification and you want it to come back, this is basically the same thing as using control grave in the configuration we're using, but it's a command you can run to make the to invoke that behavior from outside of Dunst itself. So we can basically set up a binding in Emacs to run that command to cause it to happen. Also, you can pause notifications. That's something I'll show you in a minute, how to do that in a few different ways. But if you ever want to stop notifications from popping up, like let's say you're sharing your screen, or maybe you want to focus on coding or writing, you could tell Dunst to stop showing notifications for a while, and then whenever you tell it to resume, it will give you the backlog of notifications that happened while you were having it disabled. So that's a nice feature. I think it's kind of nice to be able to turn that off whenever you need to. And the other two are just diagnostic stuff like help command and also debug logs, so those aren't very useful. So we can easily set up a function in Emacs Lisp to run Dunst control for us. We're basically just going to proxy it to the start process shell command function, which we're aware of already. And this just runs the command in the background without any kind of pop-up or waiting for it to complete, etc. What we're doing here is we are taking in a command string that gets sent to Dunst control. And here we are just invoking Dunst control, and we're concatenating that with the command that we're asking for. So if I evaluate this in my own configuration, then I can use EXWM's input set key to bind a key to run history pop and to close. So I'm going to go ahead and just evaluate these two with eval region. And I've bound super N to the history pop command and super capital N to close all. So I'm going to use super capital N right now to close that notification that just popped up. I can also use super N to call back previous notifications. So I'm basically using this Dunst control from within Emacs to show history and then close the notifications. So it's very simple to control Dunst from your Emacs config. So it's a very nice thing to have these keys set up for that. And as we mentioned before, you can enable and disable notifications from displaying at any point. So there is a special notification string you can send using notify send, or there's a few actually that you can send. The one that we're going to look at right now is Dunst command pause. So let's try this over in our own config, if I can get back to it. So I'm going to run this notify send Dunst command pause. And when I run that, you'll see that we don't get a notification. That's because Dunst has seen this message and it knows how to handle it. It knows that it's a command for it to follow. So it's going to pause notifications now. So I'm going to send a new notification. This isn't visible. And I'm going to say also this one isn't visible either. And now I'm going to run the alternate of this, which is, I believe it's resume. Let me just go and double check that real quick. Yeah, I think it's resume. So if I notify send and send Dunst command resume, now it resumes notifications, and it also gives me the backlog of whatever has been sent as notifications since I did the pausing of the notifications. Similarly, you can use the user1 and user2 signals. So if you run the kill all command and give it a specific signal to run, it will send it to the application. So in this case, we're not actually killing Dunst. What we're doing is using kill all to send the user1 signal to Dunst, and Dunst is able to pick up on that signal and then say, oh, okay, I need to disable notifications. And if you want to resume them using the kill all approach, then you would use the sig user2 signal to re-enable them. So there's just another way to do this in case you either don't have notify send, which you probably do, or if you just don't want to invoke that one itself. There may be other ways to send signals from within Emacs too. So if there's a way to call a function to do that, you could also do that instead of shelling out to a command. And lastly, if you have Dunst control, which is true if you have Dunst 1.5, you can use the set paused true or set paused false to pause or resume the notifications using Dunst control. There's also a toggle command, so I think it's toggle paused or set paused toggle, I believe is the one. And we can also do that same thing with notify send. So we can call Dunst command toggle that way, so you can either turn it on or turn it off depending on what the current state is. So here what I'm doing is I'm defining some interactive functions that will allow me to run these. So if I were to eval region on this, then in my meta-x command listing, if I run efs disable desktop notifications, it will disable notifications from occurring again. So basically, if you want to define a function that enables you to call this at any point in, let's say you have a hook for one of your capture templates. Like if you want to do a capture template in org where you want to focus on writing your journal entries, you want to get rid of distractions while you're writing your journal entry, you could have a hook for your capture template that will disable notifications, and then once your capture template is finished, then you can turn notifications back on. So it gives you some flexibility on controlling what happens in your environment. That's part of the reason why I like EXWM so much, is that you can use the power of Emacs Lisp and the power of Emacs, its extensibility in general, to control everything about your desktop environment. You don't need a bunch of complicated programs to do all this stuff. You can basically set it up yourself using just the sort of minimal programs we've chosen to comprise this whole setup. So it's a very powerful thing to do, and I definitely recommend playing around with that and coming up with some creative ideas on how you can use it. So the last thing I want to talk about is how you can send notifications from within Emacs. I mean, obviously, the easiest way would be to just call start, well, not the easiest way, but one obvious way, based on what we've seen so far, is to use start process shell command and use notify send to send a notification. So if I were to copy this line here and change the string, I can say this is from Emacs. And then if I were to use Control-X, Control-E to run that, well, it's not going to show right now because I've toggled my my desktop notifications. Oh, wow. So that did work. I think I didn't install Notify Send on this machine. That's the reason why it's not working. But if I jump over to the VM config and I jump to the scratch buffer and paste in this line, Control-X, Control-E, then you can see that we are using Notify Send from within Emacs to show a notification. However, there is a built-in way to send notifications from Emacs. There is a function called notifications notify. And if you look at the documentation for this function, it tells you basically all the parameters that it takes. And it does have quite a lot of parameters and a lot of flexibility on how it sends notifications. But basically, it will send a notification using the dbus, messaging system inside of Linux. And you can set which bus it uses. By default, it just uses the normal user session bus, which is what we want. You can set the title of the notification, the body, the name of the application, the list of actions. So you can set a lot of things here. And if we were to run this example here where we set the title and the body, you'll see that it does work. So we get this nice little Emacs icon because it's specifying that the title and the body of the notification. You might want to use this if you have some Emacs Lisp code that you've written that you want to send a notification from, like maybe some task that you run periodically. You could send a notification for that, or maybe whenever you tangle your dot files, or maybe anything. You can send a notification whenever Emacs starts up to say what the startup time was. Basically anything that you really want to do, you could use this function for. So it's a nice built-in option that you can try. There's also the alert.el or the alert library that's pretty well known. And this is not something that I would use if you just want to send a notification yourself. But it's more if you are writing an Emacs Lisp package that you want to have some kind of notification-like capabilities, but you want the user of your package to have control over how the notifications get displayed. So in alert, you can basically do the same thing, say what the message is and what the title is. If I were to use Control-X-E to run this, we'll see there's a notification here. But you can also set your the user can set their alert style to the mode line, or sorry, the mini buffer using messages, or a few different other ways to send notifications. So this is an interface you can use for sending notifications if you want it to be configurable. So it could be something that's interesting to you if you wanted to change how notifications get displayed at various different times. However, it won't change Dunst's behavior. It only changes how the alert command that is in this package works whenever you call it. So it doesn't change your entire notification setup. It only just changes just these calls to alert. So if you want just a simple way to do notifications that's in the box, definitely check out this notification to notify function. Let's see. Trying to see what version of Emacs it came in. If it will tell me. Let's see. It's somewhere in here usually. Okay, it's not giving me the information in the docs, but I think it has been there at least since Emacs 26 because I was using it in 26 as well. So I hope that this was useful to you to get your notifications set up in your desktop. I think it's pretty powerful and quite useful. I like using it in my scripts for various different things. So definitely leave some questions in the comments if you have any. And if you have any other questions on other things you might want to do with a desktop environment that maybe you've seen in other environments that you haven't yet been able to replicate in EXWM, leave a comment and let me know so that I can look into it also and maybe do more videos in this EXWM or Emacs desktop environment series. The next video is probably going to be about using sort of integrating your browser into EXWM so that you can have more of an Emacs-like flow with your browser control. And then after that, I'll probably talk about how you can embed EXWM in another desktop environment so that you don't have to do all this sort of manual labor at the low end, and you can just make use of the general structure of some other environment, and then let EXWM take care of the actual window management. So that's something we'll try to cover in the future. And once again, at the very end of the video, my camera seems to have frozen once more. I don't know exactly what's going on with that, but we will just go ahead and talk about or thank my sponsors. So I want to say thank you to all of, let me see if I can turn off this webcam because it's very distracting. I want to say thank you to all of my sponsors. All of you have, really inspired me to continue working on all these videos, and it really means a lot to me, your support. I also have a few new sponsors that have come from Patreon. I've set up Patreon recently at patreon.com/systemcrafters. So if you want to sponsor me, you can definitely check out either GitHub or Patreon for that. And I think that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoy seeing my face frozen in this position, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Definitely make sure to subscribe and click the bell notification so you get notified whenever we do new videos. I'll have another video on Wednesday and then a live stream on Friday, so definitely subscribe to be notified of that. And until next time, as always, thanks a lot for watching, and happy hacking. See you next time. Thanks a lot.